learning type stuff. The recording is in progress. And the other half of the time is spent on building web-based assessments for reading assessments. I wind up building a lot of web apps. I wind up spending a lot of time developing things in the browser. I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about how that works and convince you that maybe you too can build web apps for scientific communication or data analysis. Oh, by the way, I posted this link in the Slack. You can follow along with these slides down here.
Do we have to sign in to be able to see the slides?
I don't believe so. Is it asking you to sign in?
Mm-hmm. I can see that. That's great.
But by show of hands, who is having trouble accessing the slides?
I think I figured it out. I think we're good.
Did I accidentally send the edit link or something?
No, we're good.
And just press the arrow, the right arrow. That's the next slide.
Oh, yes. So sorry. So you can navigate this little arrow down here will tell you how you can navigate the slide deck. I'm just going to use the arrow keys, for example.
Can you share your screen on Zoom?
Oh, yes, I can. Thank you. Sorry, Zoom folks. Okay. Great.
We're not seeing it.
How about now? Thank you. Thank you for interrupting me for that. Great. So by pressing the right arrow, you can follow along with the slides. We're going to get this web technology figured out in this presentation on building web apps, I promise. Okay, so first I'd like to convince you, why should you build web apps? Why should you worry about, building things that are sort of web capable, web enabled? And I'll start with a quote from my friends Anisha Keshavan and JB Pauline. JB, I think, is an instructor this week. Yeah. Who wrote this pretty cool paper in 2019 called From the Wet Lab to the Web Lab about how web technologies are transforming neuroimaging in general. And they say the web is the best medium to facilitate novel insights by way of improved collaboration and communication. And they go on in the paper to demonstrate that. It's a really fun read. And you can look on the link there to read through it. And they go through a couple of examples of how you might use web-based technologies in your research. So for one thing, you can use web apps to share data. This is a data browser for a project that I worked on, creating pre-processed derivatives for the Healthy Brain Network study. And all of that data is on S3. It's also on FCP Indy. So it's on one of these sort of massively open distributed dataset providers. And there's a really nice web app interface that you can use to just browse the data. So any researcher can go in here, it's open, and you can click on the links and you can say, well, maybe I want to look at the derivatives and I want to see what the QSI derivatives are for this particular subject. And you could look at their figures, so on and so forth. So the web enables easy data sharing in open repositories. Oops. By the way, if you're clicking in the iframe and you try to use the down arrow, it won't work to navigate the deck anymore. One could also use the web for data analysis. So this is another web app that I built also for the same project. We had expert raters rate the quality of QSI prep outputs. QSI prep, by the way, is a diffusion MRI pre-processing suite. So we ran these subjects through QSI prep, and then we wanted to see, well, how did QSI prep do? How, what's the quality of this data? It's a pediatric neuroimaging data set, so the children wind up moving a lot. You have to sort of ask expert raters to see if they can, quantify or qualify at least the quality of those images. So I built this app to allow our expert raters, a kind of larger network of expert raters distributed around the country, to rate these images. And I think, yes, I can load that. So I sent them a bunch of JSONs with this neuroimaging data and asked them to, oh, I'm sorry, I have to do this over here, don't I? Okay. Ask them to load their images here. And it gives me a warning saying, well, you're about to upload like 200 or 270, 211 subjects. And after you load it, this browser comes up where you can select different subjects here, or if you click outside of that, you can kind of get a feel for data quality in the entire data set. And it presents you with a bunch of metrics available for scatter plots. So let's take, for example, mean frame-wise displacement here and the raw incoherence index. And it gives you a nice scatter plot of these metrics. So each of these points is a subject. And you could, for example, say, well, I'm only interested in these subjects and you know, scroll over the scatter plot there. It gives you all of those subject IDs that you selected. And then if you want to click on an individual subject, let's say you're really interested in this one. Wow, well, this is why we don't do live demos. It should work if I click there. Then it loads an individual subject and you can view their time series, for example, and look at the motion parameters as you scroll through the time series. It even includes, well, it includes a carpet plot if you're into that sort of thing. I don't really want to take the time to explain that. And you can check the registration and brain mass. And even a basic DTI color FA image. So if you know what these mean, if you're a diffusion MRI person, you'd recognize these as kind of valuable metrics to look at. And then we had our expert raters go up here and rate subjects like so, and collected their ratings. So that was an example of data analysis in the browser. We also had community scientists rate images, but because community scientists might not necessarily know what mean frame-wise displacement is, we created kind of just a binary or a two alternative force choice game where community scientists would see images like this and then swipe left or right. This was built up on top of the Brander framework, also developed by Anisha. We call this Fiber. And they rated images like so, and it was kind of gamified. So there was a leaderboard, and you see some people rated like 30,000 images. I'm not even, yeah. Oh, this is my friend Nick, who's a history professor, doesn't know anything about neuroimaging data. Well, now he does because he rated 16,000 images. So this is a nice way to involve community scientists in our work, also to communicate something about the Healthy Brain Network data set. Each of these people kind of has a bit more of an appreciation for pediatric neuroimaging now. And then later we were able to feed these community science ratings into a model that predicted data quality. Okay. You can also use it for, so that was an example of sort of community science and communication to the public. You can also use it for scholarly communication. This is a web app that I built called AFQ Browser that displays tractometry, outputs of a tractometry pipeline. So this is again more diffusion MRI stuff. What you see here is a connectogram of some participant. And you can roll over the various bundles here and highlight them. So it's just kind of interesting, even from a sort of neuroanatomy point of view. You can learn what the different bundle names are. And then this particular study is a study by Alicia Sarica of the corticospinal tract in patients with ALS and matched controls. So we can look at, for example, I think the right corticospinal tract is the one really the one to look at here. bear with me for a second while I change the controls here. And you see subjects are either in the ALS or control class. We can sort by that column, and then subjects get sorted into you know, a red or blue class, whether they have ALS or not. And we can just look at the means. And if we look at the fractional anisotropy metric, you can see there's a big group difference here between folks with ALS and folks without. So this was you know, a longer paper by Alyssa Sarka, but in, I don't know, a couple of minutes here, I could communicate a finding with the web app where I showed you a brain, I showed you some tracks, I said we have people with ALS and matched controls, I sorted on that column, and then you see you know, kind of a what statisticians would call an intraocular difference, right? I can give you p-values, but it hits you right between the eyes. Okay. And the last reason is that it's fun. It's fun to build web apps. Yes, even JavaScript is fun. So just by show of hands or Zoom folks, maybe if you can use reactions, who has experience building websites? Okay, and who has experience writing JavaScript? I see. So some people are going like this. And who enjoyed that experience? Just one? Okay. I'm going to show you. Sorry, Zoom folks. I don't know. Maybe Zoom, everyone on Zoom. Lots of thumbs down. Okay. So today I'm going to show you a JavaScript framework called Vue that I think makes JavaScript fun again. And I really do believe that JavaScript is a fun programming language. It wasn't my first programming language, but I've come to really enjoy it. For one thing, you get a really rapid feedback cycle when you develop in JavaScript. You can try it right in the console. And I think rapid feedback leads to sort of enjoyable programming. The syntax is very easy and expressive and permissive. You know, you have sort of dynamic typing and things like that. It's cross-platform and well-supported. It works on all your browsers. You don't need to download any special software just to try out JavaScript. And you can do a lot with it. There are plugins to work with, you know, WebGL and audio and data processing and things like that. And like I said before, it's even more fun with these frameworks called Vue and V, which I'm going to go into a little bit more. Before I move on, what questions do you have about what I've said so far? Okay. So we're going to be building a Vue.js web app together. The requirements for this session are, you have two paths here. You can choose your own adventure. If you'd like to develop locally on your computer, you can install Node and NPM. They'll both be installed together. You don't have to worry about installing them separately. So if you're following along the slides, you can click on that link to follow instructions there to download for your system. Or, and if you don't have Node or NPM installed already, I might recommend doing this instead. We can go to StackBlitz. If you just click on that link, vite.new/vue, you'll get a full web development IDE in your browser, and we'll be able to type code there. And while I'm talking about this next section, you can even log into StackBlitz with your GitHub account, and it'll save all your stuff that you do during this session. So you don't have to worry about sort of losing your progress if you want to go back to your notes. Knowledge of JavaScript is not required for this session. However, I won't have time to go into sort of the finer details of the language. I'll try and cover parts of JavaScript as I introduce them, but it's sort of beyond the scope of the tutorial to do an in-depth, you know, pedagogical introduction to JavaScript. Okay, our project. Generative AI is a huge headline topic these days, thanks mostly due to ChatGPT. And there are sites like thispersondoesnotexist.com. Maybe I'll even just go to that site here. If I can find the mouse, there it is. So this person does not exist.com generates a new face every time you visit. And this person does not exist as advertised by the URL. This is a synthetic image. So this site kind of communicates, it satisfies that either scholarly or public communication function that I talked about earlier with web apps. It tells you, how good these algorithms are. And if you spend a lot of time on the site, you can see, these algorithms don't always get it perfect. They're not too good with the ear symmetry, for example. They mess up on hair and teeth.
Sometimes they miss a chin. One of the ones I'm looking at now is missing a chin.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But overall, pretty good. So our aim is to create a this brain does not exist website. So we won't actually be training the generative AI in this session. I did that a few days ago using this brain gen algorithm from the No Brainer library, which is developed by Satya Ghosh with Satya Ghosh's lab. And I'm just going to point you to those images, and we'll sort of download them and display them in the browser. And if you'd like to discuss the details of like how these images were actually generated, I'm happy to discuss that sort of outside of this tutorial session. So we're going to try and build a this brain does not exist web app. And mostly we're just doing it because it's a fun sort of pedagogical project, but we can tell ourselves that we're communicating BrainGen's ability to create synthetic images to the public. I told that to my wife and she's like, why do I care? Okay, so first, some terminology about web apps. A few people raised their hands and said they'd built websites before, so I wanted to sort of cover some terminology you might hear about websites. This is from a 10 Simple Rules article. I love these 10 Simple Rules articles, by the way. They're always very accessible and fun way to introduce new topics. This one is about developing web apps for researchers. And they use this figure, so I just stole it from them because I didn't want to write my own, which is a common technique for web developers. You have your user here in a stick figure. You have the front end. So the front end is everything that happens on your local machine. If we talk about computation happening on the front end, that's computation that doesn't involve a server or something in the cloud. It's all happening on your machine. All of those apps that I showed you before, the neuroimaging web apps, were front-end apps, actually with the exception of the community science rating one. And that it's that way for a reason, because often we deal with data sets for which there are data usage agreements, and we can't host potentially identifying information on the cloud. So it's really nice to develop web apps that put a lot of computation on the front end. The front end does communicate somehow with a hosting service or a backend service that might have a database. So that stuff is all represented here in the cloud. Maybe there are phone notifications from in the article that in the app that they talk about in this article, they wanted their app to send people push notifications. So they had to mention how to do phone notifications as well. What questions do you have about this slide? So far, so good. Okay, some other terminology. I mentioned JavaScript. I ought to define it first. It's a scripting language for dynamic web content. It is not the same as Java. They're two separate languages. They just have one half of a name in common. But it is the most popular programming language on the web. I think 95% of websites are written on the front end with JavaScript. Node is a JavaScript runtime environment. So your browser knows how to just read JavaScript code and execute it. But if you want to run it, in your terminal or something, you'll need Node. And I had notes there earlier about how to install Node. Node also allows you to run JavaScript on the back end in like a server environment. So in the good old days, you'd have sort of JavaScript running stuff on the client on the front end, and then you'd need some sort of server language like Python or PHP or something like that. Now you can write JavaScript only applications using Node on the back end. NPM is a package manager for JavaScript. So for people coming from like Python, this is like kind of like pip or conda. So this helps you import other people's work and use it in your own project. Vue.js is a JavaScript framework or perhaps a meta framework. So it helps you write web apps and build user interfaces, taking with a lot of syntactic sugar, basically taking a lot of the boilerplate away from you. And then Vite, which is pronounced Vite because it's like the French word for fast, not Vite. This is a build tool for web projects. So it's a bundler plus a server, right? If you want to develop a web app on your own computer, you need to serve that website and have an app that kind of bundles all your JavaScript files into one file that a browser could read. Okay. We're finally ready to start development. For those of you on Mac or Linux who would like to do local development, you can get NPM using this shell script. You can get NPM and Node using this shell script. For those of you on Windows, you can use the installer here by clicking on that link and clicking through. And like I said, for those of you developing in the cloud, you can use StackBlitz by going to this website, vite.new/view. Yeah. Yes. You mean the StackBlitz link?
I mean, that command.
Oh, the command. Yes, I can do that.
Just because it's long enough, but
Okay. Let me go back. Oops. Copy. And I will put it in Slack. Thanks for asking that. So for Mac, Linux users, you can download, and you're really downloading NVM using there. By show of hands, who's developing locally here? One person, okay. And who's using StackBlitz in the cloud? Is that everyone else? Okay. And then maybe Zoom folks, could I get you to post in the comments and Noah, if you could tell me.
I'm seeing some thumbs up. But
Thumbs up are good, but non-informative. Okay. So for those of you developing on StackBlitz, you can ignore this slide. But for those of you who have downloaded NPM and Node, you will do these commands. So Vite has a template that you can use to create a new project. And that command is npm create. And then you pass it the name of a template, and the template in this case is Vite at latest. That at tag means I want you to pull the latest version. And once you press enter there, you can see Vite will do a bunch of stuff. And then it'll tell you a list of commands that it would like you to enter afterwards. This GIF will keep looping, so I'll kind of talk through it as it goes. So we type npm create Vite at latest. If it's your first time running this command, it'll say, do you want me to install this package? It'll ask you for a project name. So I typed in this brain does not exist, but you can name the project whatever you'd like. You can name it, NeuroHackademy demo or something like that. It then asks you to select a framework. So Vite is not, it's framework agnostic. We're using it to write a Vue app, but you could write a React app. You may have heard that name as well. You could write, I think it has an Angular template. Or you could write, you could tell it you want just vanilla JavaScript if you want to take care of a lot of the tooling there. But here we're using we're using the Vue template, and I also told it that I want to write a JavaScript web app rather than a TypeScript web app. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript with type annotations or type bindings, which is really, really cool, but we're not going to talk about that in this tutorial. You keep pressing enter, and then it'll install some stuff and it'll tell you what commands to put in there. So local devs, let me know when you're done with that step, either by raising your hand or by giving us a thumbs up on Zoom. For those of you on StackBlitz, when you go to that link, it will fork a project under your account or your guest account if you haven't created an account, and it does all this stuff in the background. Okay. I'm going to move on in the interest of time here. So from here on, I'm going to develop our web app in StackBlitz because it seems like that's the majority of the users here. So I'll ask you to sort of follow along with me there. If you want to follow along on your local machine, these are the commands that the V initializer told you to use anyway, so you're probably already here, but you'll want to open up that folder in your favorite IDE, whatever that is, and then follow the link to your local host or your development server. For everyone else, follow me over here. So we're heading over to StackBlitz now. I'm going to increase my font size here. And also take up the whole screen. There we go. Can folks in the back row see this? It's small. Okay. Well, I'll close this sidebar soon, and then I'll be able to increase the font a bit more. But just to orient you to StackBlitz, it's sort of an IDE here. On the left side, you have a file browser, which I'm going to close, and then we have two panes. How's that size? Is that better? Okay. And how about on Zoom? Is it catastrophically tiny?
No, it's okay on Zoom.
It's okay.
It's honestly better on Zoom.
It's better on Zoom than okay. See, web apps. Okay. On the left side, we see our source code, and on the right side, we see our development server. And if your screens are tiny and you don't want to have the server taking up space, you can click this button to open link a new tab, and then you'll have two separate tabs, one where you can edit your code and one where you can view the results. We also have a terminal window down here. Right now it's running the development server, but in a minute we'll use that to install, in a few minutes we'll use that to install new software. Okay. So it takes a few seconds to start up, and we see this starter template. So this is kind of a highly opinionated template about, that tells you what a Vue app should look like. And I love highly opinionated templates written by other experts, because then I can just go in and steal stuff from them, or figure out, what, to put more diplomatically, figure out what their recommendations are. So So you can see it includes links to the documentation for Vue and Vite, actually Vue and Vite there, and a button that increments a count when you click on it. So I'm clicking on the button and the count is incrementing. So let's take a look inside and see how this works. I'm going to open up the file browser again and go into source app.vue. So this is where a Vue app is created. Wait, I'm sorry, main.js is where I'm going. I'll get to app.vue. This is where a Vue app is created, and it's only four lines. The first line imports this create app function from Vue's core library. The second one imports a style file, and we'll kind of ignore that for now, but CSS or SCSS is a language that you can use to style your web pages and make them look pretty. The third line imports our app.vue component, which we'll look at in a second. And then the fourth line creates our Vue instance by passing the app component to the create app method, and then asking it to mount the Vue instance inside of a div, an HTML div element that has the ID app. And we can actually find that app inside of index.html. Let's look inside of index.html. You can see, okay, so here's the header, some metadata, there's a title, but in the HTML body, we really just have two elements. We have a div with an ID of app, and we have a script asking it to run this main.js script. Okay, what questions do you have so far?
What other type of divs are there? So is app as in like web application, but is there app on this?
Yeah, so the ID there is a name that we give it. It's a variable that we could call it anything we want, but it's unique to that one div. So div is an HTML element, like divider, I think it might be short for. I'm not sure exactly. And then the only requirement we have for the ID is that it's unique, right? So every div has to, it doesn't have to have its own ID, but if it does have an ID, it should be unique. So for example, we could have said like brain app there, and then our app will break because in main.js, we told it to mount to the app div, but the app div doesn't exist anymore, so we have to tell it brain app. Did I answer your question? Okay. And what you saw there was a great example of what's called hot module replacement, which is just a fancy way of saying when you make a change to the source code, the development server just updates automatically, which is a great way to develop. You don't have to like type code and then compile it or anything like that. What other questions do you have?
I have one
Yeah.
about something you said earlier. Can you describe the difference between like front end computation and computation on the server? Like what does front end mean in particular?
Front end means it happens on your machine, and that's it.
So like on my machine, I'm on the internet, but it's using my computer's compute power.
Mhm.
Which one-
Yeah, it's using your processor, your memory. There's you know, kind of in browser memory. You know how like Chrome takes up like a ton of memory. It's sort of famous for doing that. Yeah, all that stuff is happening on your computer, and no data is being sent over the network.
So most computers just have like innate like threshold for how much you're allowed to ask a computer to do before it starts complaining.
Yes, yeah, that's sort of your OS's and browsers' job is to like manage those resources. As web developers, I think it's very hard to I don't know, get around those limits, or like, I don't know, crash someone's computer or something like that.
You mean it's hard to exceed the limits?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I guess you can try to do as much compute as you can until their computer freezes up. But then you wind up just having a really unresponsive website, and browsers these days are pretty good at just saying, hey, this tab that you have open is consuming a lot of memory. We think you should close it, you know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
So when you first go to a website, what you're downloading is a bunch of instructions for your computer, right? That's what the HTML code is. That's what the JavaScript code is. But the actual execution of that code happens on your machine. And if something happens on the back end, that's when you're sending instructions, some computer somewhere in the cloud is doing computation and then sending you the result.
thanks.
Cool. Okay, yes,
Where's the count button coming from?
sorry.
Sorry, where is the count button coming from? Like, where's the
Oh.
code that specifies the count?
That's a great question. We're gonna spend a lot of time on the count button, but not yet. Okay, so I mentioned that we imported this app from app.view. Let's go look at app.view. And this is our first, I'm gonna close the sidebar here again. This is our first look at what Vue calls a single file component, or SFC. This is sort of the workhorse of Vue. It's a kind of a reusable, self-contained block of code that encompasses HTML, JavaScript, and styling. So you can see that it has 3 parts. It has a script tag. That's where you do all your JavaScript stuff. It has a template tag. A template is where you put all your HTML. A Vue template is like a superset of HTML. It's valid HTML plus some other stuff that Vue knows how to read. And then you can have a style section here where you put in your CSS and styling instructions. So everything is kind of self-contained and kind of one logical unit for what you want the app to do, instead of having to edit multiple files. App.view shows us a few things, right? It shows us in the template, it shows us how to import different assets. So it has the logos here in the HTML. There's one logo, there's another. So you can use, and we're supplying us the source for these logos here in this attribute. Maybe I should back up. So this is an image tag. All these HTML things that are surrounded by arrows are called tags, and tags can have attributes. So for image tags, you can set a source attribute telling it where you want to get this logo. And you can reference it using relative paths like dot/assets/view.svg. So because we're in app.view, that goes into assets and grabs the view.svg. Or you can reference it by putting it in this public folder and just having an absolute path that starts with slash. So anything in the public folder will just kind of get copied over into your app. And the template demonstrates these 2 different ways. There are actually reasons not to use this public folder, but we won't get into that. Then we see that there's this hello world element, right? And this is weird because this is not an HTML tag that you're used to. If you just write sort of vanilla HTML, first off, no HTML elements have casing like that. All HTML elements are always lowercase with dashes in between the words. So that tells you, hey, this is something new. This is something from Vue, not sort of vanilla HTML. And this is in fact a Vue component that we import from another file. So that's all our JavaScript is doing inside this tag. We're importing a hello world component from Vue, and then we're serving it here. We're rendering it here, I guess I should say. What questions do you have about that? Okay. There's also this kind of weird message attribute that we're passing in. What's going on there? So we've imported this child component hello world, and we're calling it and we're passing in a message. Let's see what happens. Maybe we can just change it to brains. Oh, there we go. Change it to brains and it updates the website. So this message is being passed into Hello World, and Hello World is doing some sort of computation with it. We don't know what until we look in this hello world.view component, but this message was kind of dynamically rendered as we passed it in. So let's actually take a look at this hello world component. And this is where we can see the count button. Okay. We see in the JavaScript part, we've used this kind of special function that's part of the Vue standard library. You don't have to import it. It's called define props. So you're defining a prop. A prop is a way to pass information from a parent component to a child component. And you saw that we did that in the app.view component. So we passed in this message. We let our child component know that it should expect a string. This is really nice because if you pass in the wrong data type, you'll get a nice error message. And then we use that, we rendered it here in the template. So one core feature of Vue.js is what's known as declarative rendering. And this is declarative in kind of the nerdy programming language sense of the word. Declarative means you want to describe the logic of a program, but not necessarily its control flow, right? My logic is that I want to pass in a message and I want it to be rendered. Okay, and Vue is going to take care of the control flow of like how that gets passed into different things on sort of in the JavaScript computation. But what we've declared is that we want to render it here in this h1 tag. H1 is a header. We want to render it here. And the way that we tell Vue to reference a property is by using these double curly brackets, or because Vue developers have a sense of humor, they call these mustaches. So use mustaches to reference sort of dynamic properties. Any part of the JavaScript state that is in the script tag that changes the template, that changes what gets rendered is known as reactive. So you have a reactive state that you maintain in the JavaScript part, and then it gets rendered in the template based on what you write in the HTML. You can see that we have another thing that changes the rendering, and that's namely the count. And because count wasn't passed in as a prop, in order to tell Vue that we want it to be reactive, we have to use this ref keyword. We have to say, hey, Vue, this is a reference. I'm going to start it off as the number 0, but it's going to change, and I want you to keep updating your references to count. And then again, here we can reference count using the mustache operator in the template right there. So we could even, you can put regular JavaScript in here. We could say, well, instead of count, give me count plus 1. And you can see it updated here. So the count starts at 1, even though we declared it as 0. Or maybe tell me whether count is odd or even. So now it'll just go 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. Okay. Any questions about that? All right, we can reference the reactive state, but this mustache operator is really only for text rendering. It's stuff that you put inside the content of HTML tags. But there's lots of other stuff to an HTML tag, right? There's this, we said that the button is of type button. We passed an attribute, right? Or earlier you saw in the image tag, we passed a source attribute. You can pass the ID attribute or the class attribute. And it'd be really great if that stuff was made dynamic as well, if we could reference that in Vue. You can't do that with the mustache operator, but you can use what are called directives. So directives are special HTML attributes that start with this V tag. V dash. So that's not part of HTML syntax, but it is part of the Vue template syntax. So let me introduce the very first Vue directive. It's going to be called V bind. So V dash and then bind, B-I-N-D. And we'll see if we can dynamically change the color of this header right here. to, let's say, red or blue. And the typical way you would do this in HTML is to attach a class to these elements and then use your CSS to style that class. So I'm going to use this special view keyword vbind followed by colon, and then vbind takes an argument. So I'm going to say class, and for now let's just say red. So I've attached red, the red class to this, and nothing is happening to brains, right? Because I haven't defined this class. But if I go down here to the style and create a new style in CSS, the way to declare styling for a class or select a class for styling, is with the dot operator. So I can say dot red. So I'm saying for the red class, please apply these styles. And let's say the color is going to be red. While we're at it, let's add a blue class. Color is blue. Okay. Oh, I see what's happening here. I've told it that it should be red, but everything, what's in quotes here is actually JavaScript. So it said, well, there's no red variable. So let's call this the title color. And declare a variable here, title color is equal to red. Great. In this case, I'm having to reload. I don't know why hot module replacement fails sometimes, but if that ever happens to you, you can press that reload button. And now we see our title here is red.
Can you go back down to the style version?
Of course, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm worried that I introduced two things at once there, both vbind and class. So let's take away vbind for a second. And then we can actually say that the class is red or the class is blue. So now what we're doing is vanilla HTML and CSS. We're just changing the class attribute of this H1 of the header to either red or blue. And when it's red or blue, it adopts the styling that we defined now below. But what I'd really like to do is use this vbind directive to make it dynamic. So vbind colon, and then the argument of vbind, we're saying, I want you to take class and bind it to something in my JavaScript section, in this case, title color. Okay, and here, now I can change this to red or this to blue. And we have a similar effect. You might be thinking, well, big deal, Adam, you changed red to blue in either the template section or in the script section. So what? But now we can do something besides changing the color manually. You can imagine here, instead of title color, we could say, well, if color, if count is even, return blue, otherwise do red. I'm not sure why that's not compiling, actually. Oh, it should be a question mark. Thank you. There you go. And now, when we update the count, it goes from red to blue, red to blue, red to blue. So we've dynamically changed the assign the class. This, by the way, thanks Noah for correcting me there. This is what's known as a ternary operator. You may have seen it in I don't know, Python or R or C or something like that. But it's kind of a fancy way of doing an if statement. So the thing before the question mark is a logical operator. If it returns true, you get the first value, and if it returns false, you get the value after the colon. So we did kind of a one-liner statement inside of the template. What questions do you have about that? By the way, vbind is so common that you don't need to include it. If you have this colon in front of a variable, Vue just knows you want to bind that variable. You're saying, no, this is a dynamic variable. The thing in quotes should be something that exists in JavaScript, not just a string. Okay, so template expressions are fun. We used it in defining the class. You may notice that it's used here in count++. We'll get to that on click in a second, but that's also a template expression. But they can wind up getting kind of unwieldy and bloated and hard to maintain. You can imagine, I mean, even the ternary operator is a little bit hard to read, right? And if we had to do that in multiple places, we'd be repeating ourselves a lot. So luckily, Vue has a solution for us. We can define a computed property and dynamically change it based on the value of some variable. So I'm gonna reinsert title color and try to do maybe the naive thing here, which is just put that logic here. Return red, otherwise blue. Great, and I have to refresh for some reason. Okay, well, let's see what's wrong. We get to do some debugging here. I'm gonna open up my JavaScript console. Blue is not defined. Oh, okay. Yeah, blue should be in quotes there. So for reference, I opened that up in a separate tab, and then I opened up the developer tools, which you can do by going to View, developer tools. Whoops, well, which toggle developer tools. So if I already have it open, it closes it. And I got a nice console here with an error message. Okay. But you may notice that if I increase the count, it does not change the color of this title. And that's because the script section runs and it computes the title color for the initial value of count, and then it doesn't know to update it. I have to tell Vue that this is a computed property that like depends on stuff that's going to change inside of the template. So Vue gives us a nice function for that. I'm going to import computed from Vue. And then I'm going to tell it that title color is a computed property. So computed is a function that takes another function. And a nice way to write functions in JavaScript. This is a bit of JavaScript syntax for those of you who don't have JavaScript experience. You can define a function using this arrow. So I'm saying this would be like using the def keyword in Python. I'm saying here's a function. It takes no arguments, but it returns count. It returns the ternary operator that we wrote earlier. The only other gotcha here is that when you're referencing count here in the template, you can just reference count. But in the JavaScript part, right, we told count that it's a reference, and Vue kind of wraps up that 0 value and a bunch of other Vue stuff in this complicated object that knows how to keep track of what's happening in the template. So in order to access the actual value in JavaScript, we do count that value. That's a common sort of gotcha in Vue programming. And I'll save it and move to the other tab, and and it's not happy. Unexpected token. Oh, I've made some sort of syntax error here. It doesn't like that. That semicolon. I could have also defined a more complicated function that returns a value here. So this is a full arrow function syntax right here. You have a function with arguments in parentheses, an arrow to the output, and then curly braces, which defines the scope of the function. Huh, that's funny. When I save, I guess. Yeah, the linter, there's some linter running on Stack Blitz that wants to enforce a certain code style. So when I save, that's why you saw everything jump. Sorry if that's kind of jarring for you to see. Now I should be able to load, press the count button. Oops. Yay, we have our brain color toggle again. What questions do you have about view properties? Computed properties in view. Basically, view now knows that this title color depends on count, and it's going to keep track of updating it. Okay. I want to turn our attention to the count button, and then I promise we'll start looking at some brains. You may have noticed this on click. @click is a syntactic sugar for v on, which is another view directive. It starts with v dash. But because v on is so common to write, it's often shortened to just @. So this listens for different events on elements. So whenever the click event is registered on this button, it's going to run the code in here. And here again, we're using a template expression. We could also have referenced a function. So in script here, I can declare a new function, const, I don't know, increment. And this equals a function, again, an arrow function. So something that takes no arguments. And it doesn't even have to return anything, right? It's the side effect is that count.value will be incremented by 1. So then instead of this count plus plus, we can call the increment. There's going to be some sort of error here. I'm not sure what. Bear with me for a second. It's very hard to turn my neck and see what's going on here. So I'm gonna try and mirror my screens instead. There we go. And try to get the Zoom stuff out of the way. Okay. So here in our template section, we have this button. When we click on it, we want to run the increment function. It failed to reload due to syntax errors when putting non-existent modules. Oh, okay. I just had to reload the page. This is like the shutdown reboot kind of method of debugging. Great. And now the count button is working. If we press count there, it increments. But because we wrote it in a function, we're free to change that function. We could increment by 2, for example. And now it's incrementing by 2. Okay. So that was event listeners using v on. We've covered the vbind directive to bind data. What questions do you all have about event listeners? Great. Okay. I mentioned that we would be looking at brains, right? So let me deliver as promised. Before this class, I ran those those no-brainer models. I generated a bunch of synthetic T1s, and I put them on in a Google Cloud storage bucket. So I think if I go to console.cloud, yes. Oh, sorry, that is the wrong bucket. There's this BrainGen bucket here. And it has a folder called fake and various resolution images. Let's go with the higher resolution ones. And you can see lots of images here. So I'll just click on the first one. Because I've made these images public, there is a public URL. So I'll copy that URL. And why don't I actually just put it in Slack here. Apologies, Zoom folks, you can't see this. Zoom stuff is in the way. So if you click on that link, it'll download a Nifty for you, right? We'd like to show that Nifty in the browser. So let's go ahead and let's clean up our template a little bit here. I'm going to go into app.view and delete these logo divs. We don't need to show the Vite and View logos anymore. I'm going to go back into Hello World, and instead of counting, let's write a button. Let's see if we can just generate this URL dynamically, because we're going to want to grab random participants, right? So here, changing the color was fun, but we don't need that anymore. But I want the message, instead of passing it in as a prop, I'm going to define the message here. I'm going to define a brain URL, and I'm going to copy paste that URL that I posted in Slack. This is just here to sort of remind us of the format. You can see the only thing that'll change, maybe we want to change the resolution, but the only thing that'll really change when we grab a different subject is this subject identifier. I've adopted kind of a BIDS-ish naming convention for these Nifties. So I'd like to make brain URL a ref because it's going to be dynamic. And even better, maybe I will create a function that generates a new brain URL from a different from a random number. Generate brain URL. Here we get to write another arrow function. So this one, again, it'll take no arguments. And inside this function, I'm going to build this string up. So we have a root URI that is this part, storage.googleapis.com/braingen. Let's go ahead and put the fake and res on there too. We'll have a subject number. And this is going to be a random number, which is going to be between 0 and 1. So we'll multiply by 100, because that'll give us a number between 0 and 100. And I'll do math.floor to give us a number between 0 and 100. No, let me know if any of the Slack comments there are blockers or things that I should respond to. Okay. You may also notice that these numbers are 0 padded. So I'm going to create the subject string by passing that number into the string constructor, subject number, and then I think it's pad start. You're going to see me do some Googling here. JavaScript pad string left. Yes, pad start. Hey. Okay, so you can see Googling is your friend for programming in all languages, especially JavaScript. So we have a string here. We're going to pad it at the beginning. 3 digits and pad it with the number 0. In fact, the subject string is prefixed by sub. So that's the subject string. And finally, we can return a string by putting all this stuff together. I'm going to introduce another JavaScript syntax thing. This is called a string literal when you start with the backtick like that. The equivalent in Python would be like f strings. So it's a way to insert variables inside of your string. So here the variable we'll start with the root URI variable, add a slash, start with the next comes the subject string, followed by underscore, and then the rest of that string that I had there on line 4, res128 underscore braingen.nii.gz. Great. So we've generated a new brain URL. In fact, just for sort of quick testing and debugging, let's save this as a variable and use some good old print statement debugging to make sure that we're doing it correctly. So before I return it in this function, I'm going to use the JavaScript equivalent of a print statement, and that's console.log brain URL. So this is a side effect that's going to happen every time we run this generate brain URL function. And because we already have this nice button here that increments a count, maybe I'll get rid of the count and title color since we don't need those anymore, and increment function since we don't need that anymore. I'll give this button a name called generate new brain. And then when we click, I'm going to ask it to run this generate brain URL command. I can see down here in the terminal, I already have some unexpected token. It's telling me that I still have this increment in my script. Oh, I see. Those are old errors. Maybe if I scroll down. Oh, great. Okay, good. It seems to be happy with me now. I see a green font, which is usually a good sign. And hopefully, if I press generate new brain, I'll get a string here in the console. This is where that print statement shows up. Can you all read in deck? Should I increase the font size again? My apologies. Okay, we seem to have a decent string. I'm going to get a little bit more of the cruft out of this template by getting rid of this, checkout, these checkout links. And because we're no longer referencing red, blue, and read the docs in the template, I think I can get rid of that. Okay. So we finally have a dynamically generated URL that gives us a nifty file if that URL is downloaded. It's actually a rather short step from here to showing that nifty, but I want to ask first what questions you have. First off, is everyone caught up here to a point where they can generate this URL? I see some people nodding no. Do you have any questions? Or would you just like more time? Yeah. In front of the root URI. Oh, so I'm sorry, that is a $sign. So I should have explained that a bit better. In those string literals where you use the backticks to define the string, and then you want to reference variables, the way to reference a variable is to use $, open curly brackets, and then whatever variable you want, or whatever JavaScript you want, you can even perform computation inside of those, and then close curly bracket. Thank you for that question. And now that I've mirrored my screen, can the Zoom folks still see?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, looks fine. Great. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who's caught up?
Special character right after the equal sign const string URL. This it's like an apostrophe, but it's tilted. Did you have to do anything special to that?
Sorry. Oh, this. Yes, so that's the backtick. On my MacBook, it's next to the #1 key on the top. It's to the left of the 1, but your keyboard layout might be different.
Okay.
And then you'll need it also to close the string at the very end. Okay. I mentioned like we have this URL, now we'd like to show it. And the nice thing about JavaScript, or really any programming, any like sort of mature programming language, is that there are a lot of other great libraries that you can just use in your projects. And one of these great libraries is called NeuroHackademy. Whoa, okay. I think if I just search it, there we go. So if you go to this website, and I will post this website in Slack. You can see that NeuroHackademy is this JavaScript library for medical image viewing. Basically, it can show, well, it shows lots of formats. We're going to use it to show a nifty format. There are other potential solutions for this. There's another one called Papaya. If you've used the Mango viewer, that actually uses Papaya under the hood. There are lots of other viewers for neuroimaging files, but we like this one. And you may have guessed, since it has view in the name, it has great view bindings as well. So I'm going to scroll down here, and they even have an example, a Vue.js example. And you can see one of the first things they tell us to do is to install the new package, right? We want to use someone else's library, we have to install it in our project. And for that, we use the npm package manager. So for those of you developing locally, you'll do this in your terminal. For those of you on StackBlitz, you'll have to open another terminal, which you can do by going into this lower window here and pressing on this plus sign. That opens kind of a new tab in your terminal. And you can see you're in projects / VJS Vite, and then some hash or something. Yours will be different than mine. And I'll copy that command from the NeuroHackademy documentation. So that's npm I is short for install in this case, at NeuroHackademy. So NeuroHackademy is the organization that publishes this. So you put the @ symbol there, and then /NeuroHackademy, it's also the name of the package. And I'm going to press enter. And NPM added 13 packages in 2 seconds. And if you want to learn how to fund 3 of those packages, you can run npm fund for details. But I'm not going to fund them. I'm just going to use their excellent products. Okay, let's go back to this new view documentation. And you see here, their example is itself a single file component, right? It's the same script template, and they didn't even bother writing the style tag because you don't need to, it's optional. But it's a script and template. So I'm going to cannibalize some of this stuff and put it in our app. We'll need to import NeuView and declare this an instance of this new NeuView class. So I'm copying those 2 lines, bring them up here. It's nice to put all your import statements together. Some linters will even fail if you don't. So we've imported NeuView. We've created this new NV variable, which is an instance of a NeuView object.
Can you minimize the videos that are on this screen?
Sorry, yes, I can.
Thank you.
Would you like me to go back to there?
Yeah, just for a second.
Of course. Okay. So we've imported the NeuView library and we've declared an instance of the NeuView class. You can see, I'm not going to copy all this. We don't, in fact, need all of it because we've generated our own URL there. In this example, they're sort of hard coding one of their example URLs, you know, the MNI template. But this code we do need, and this code in the template. So the way that NeuView works is by attaching itself to a canvas element. So we'll put that canvas in our template. Here, I'm no longer passing a message in, so maybe I'll just write, this brain does not exist. This P tag here, P stands for paragraph. That's cruft left over from the template, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Here, we have a fairly lightweight template here. A header says this brain does not exist. A canvas with a special ID, GL, that NeuView is going to attach itself to and do all of its work to visualize our brain. We've hard-coded height and width here. That's probably not what we want to do in the long run, but I think it's fine for now. And then we have a button here that when you click it, runs this generate brain URL function. We'll add to that function soon. And then there were 2 more lines in the NeuView example here. NV attached to GL and NV load volumes. So I'm copying those here at the bottom of our script. This first one attaches itself to the canvas element with the ID GL. That's how it renders the brain. And then the second one loads volume, but we don't have this .volume list because that's something from their example. But if I look at what this .volume list is, we can guess at what the data structure that they want is. They want a list or an array in JavaScript where each element in the volume list is itself an object with a key called URL and a value, which is the URL that we want to pass it. So in fact, I'm going to copy that and ask it to load volumes there. And to do that sort of auto formatting, I just press save and the linter took care of everything else. Now for the URL, let's actually pass it brain URL. Whoops, not in quotes, it's a variable. Whoa. Oh, I understand this error. It's getting this error and it's saying basically in this attached to canvas error, it's trying to get the canvas. But we made a critical mistake. I made a critical mistake in putting this code in the script without waiting for the canvas to even be loaded. So this script tag runs before the template is actually rendered. And I made that mistake because I didn't actually read the example. You can see here, they put it in this mounted function. So everything in this mounted function happens after the template is mounted. If you would like more information on this, I'll send out a link to a description of the view lifecycle. Every component has a view lifecycle. It's this very kind of ornate flow diagram, and those are you can make code execute at certain points in the lifecycle. But for us, we want to run it in the on-mounted. We want to use the on-mounted function, which we will import in just a second. So I'm going to grab that code and stick it inside of this on-mounted callback function. And we can't forget to import on-mounted from view. It doesn't seem happy with that. Well, let me Google view lifecycle functions now. Lifecycle hooks. Oh, well, this is the diagram that I was mentioning, but I actually want. Yeah, I appear to be using it the intended way.
I think there should be an error on this.
Sorry?
You got.
Oh, yeah. It should be an arrow, not an equals. Thank you, Noah. I'm really glad you're here.
I need no JavaScript.
Great. Let's reload this page. You can see that it's loading a brain.
Can you go back to your script, please?
Yes.
Just the unmounted part, yeah.
The on-mounted part. Okay.
Yeah.
While I'm showing that to you, I'm going to fix the error. Remember, I said that anytime something is a ref, if you want to reference its value in JavaScript, you have to do this dot value. What questions do you have before we, or would you like me to just sort of stay on this page longer? Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and close that terminal. Make this terminal smaller. Oh, that is tiny. let me not hard code this height, or at least give it a larger, give it larger dimensions here. There we go. And you can see now we have a this brain does not exist site. Our generate new brain button does not work. We haven't gotten to that yet, but every time we reload the page, it will load a new random image. So we've at least replicated the functionality of this person does not exist. And I've saturated the available time. So I think we'll have to put the button work save that for later. I'm happy to sort of discuss how that would work. And I have not grabbed that domain name, by the way, if anyone wants to grab thisbraindoesnotexist.com. What questions y'all have, or are there any, is anyone getting stuck? Yeah.
I, at some point, just like the color went all the same and it hasn't been loading, but I'm not sure the value. So like in the syntax behind when we did the generate brain URL function, is there like a rhyme or a reason to where you put what syntax?
In the generate brain URL function,
The scripts.
right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm mostly I have a lot of variables that I define here, mostly just to kind of decompose that very long URL into bite-sized pieces. This part is basically it's a string, and this part is a string. This is the part where we do a little bit more computation, and where I would suspect errors might be introduced. So subject number here is grabbing a random number between 0 and 99. And then subject string is sort of processing that number, padding it with zeros on the left, and adding this sub dash prefix. And then the last brain URL is taking all the component parts and sticking them together. There may be a better way to do this, but it's sort of what got the job done there. But are you still seeing an error?
I can match it up.
Okay, yeah, happy to come over. Yeah.
So with creating simulated brains, right? What are like different ways we could utilize this? Like, would this be good for like running like simulations on data before we actually use our own data? Like, what are the?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. This is a little bit beyond the scope of the web app talk, but I think the advertisement for BrainGen, which is the model that generates these, is that it learns basically it learns like a nice template, and then sort of naturalistic variants around that template that might represent a population, and then you could use that to train your algorithms. I mean, if you wanted, you could use it to train your models before ever seeing real data, and then double blind your own study, right?
Okay. So it would be especially useful for like disease population groups, perhaps.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
we see specific patterns.
yeah. And generative models are there's a lot of hope that generative models might be very good at kind of outlier detection, right? Like if you give me your demographics, I could generate your brain and then look at your real brain, and if there's a big difference between the two, that might be a biomarker.
Interesting.
Itself.
Sensitive degeneration.
Yeah, that's the hope. There are a lot of caveats to what I just said.
Sure, but I was just trying to like understand like the practical. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you for giving me your time before lunch, and happy to discuss more about web apps either now or during project week or anything like that. And I'll stick around if you have